Sowmya, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to this exciting conversation.
I'm going to take a page from Simon Sinek's book, quite literally, and start the conversation with why. What is the why behind C6? What was and what is the why behind C6?
Interesting. I mean, I could speak a day about it, but I know we have a very limited time, so I'll keep it short.
We have time. We have time.
So, see, we started the company way back in 2010, right? Out of India. And at that point of time, one of the biggest crises was this whole biofuels. The price of fuel was skyrocketing, and people were really looking at alternatives on what can replace fossil fuels, right? Not just from a climate perspective, but also from a more scalable perspective for over the years. And coming from India, many of the solutions which are being developed, like whether it's ethanol or your first generation, but second generation, all of them needed a lot of land. And you wake up in a country where there's not much land and a lot of people that you need to feed. You cannot say that I'm going to use that land to produce fuel. It just doesn't make any sense. You've got to use all the land that you have to produce food.
The land was essentially just too valuable to use for fuel. It had to be used for food.
Yeah, so we looked at a graph which basically said that, the land per capita is highest in Brazil, followed by United States. But in most of the other countries, it's very, very limited. And, especially in this part of the world, you really want to save all of it for producing food and not for producing fuel. So it just didn't make sense for us. And that's when we came across seaweeds. And in fact, to start with, we actually started with microalgae. We looked at microalgae for a bit, but quickly we realized, that making it a scalable solution and an energy efficient solution doesn't work. So most of us were engineering graduates with a biotechnology background. So we could understand that the math kind of didn't add up so well there. But then when we came across seaweed, it just made all the sense, right? Because you don't need land, you don't need fresh water, you don't need fertilizer, you don't need any of those scarce nutrients or requirements. So it really made it a very sustainable alternative, and it made sense for us to work on it. However, the only limitation was, that it has not been scaled. There was no innovation or technology in it, and that we were more confident about bringing it together because that's where our expertise kind of lied. That's how we got started. We said that we can really in a biomass solution, but it has to be done the right way and sustainably.
If I were to ask you what were the problems that you had identified and that you wanted to solve, what would you say?
So for us, the mission has always been the same. We're looking at potential avenues for replacing or reducing our dependency on fossil fuels. We eventually, of course, we want to make biofuels and biochemicals based out of seaweed, but there's a whole bunch of other markets that you can open up before that. So the first market we opened up was agriculture. Today we use a lot of fertilizer, so our products can be used in agriculture to improve the fertilizer use efficiency and also improve the productivity of the plants itself. So that's the first commercialization opportunity we opened up. Now that as the scale of the seaweed cultivation keeps going up, we start opening up markets like food ingredients, feed, and biomaterials. So that's how the curve looks.
Fantastic. We'll come back to that later. I wanted to ask you before we move on, what's the story behind the name C6?
Okay. So alert, we were young kids, 21-year-old,
Okay.
trying to come up with a name for the company, right? And we said, like I said, we're very passionate about trying to, replacing solutions for fossil fuel. So we really wanted to make a solution there. And fossil fuel is hydrocarbon. And the chemical equation of the hydrocarbon is actually C6, with the carbon,
Yeah.
six carbon chain. So the name C6 is a play on that. We said we want to create those six carbon chains, but from the seas and using seaweed. So
Makes sense. Makes
so
sense.
all those three together is how we came up with the name C6.
That's cool. and you were based obviously in India. Has the location influenced or played a role in the development of the company in any way?
Absolutely. Because we're based in India, the tropical weather, right? So we started looking only at the tropical seaweeds. That had a big impact because you always work with what grows in your backyard. And that became a big blessing in disguise because the tropical seaweeds are known to be grown throughout the year. There's no seasonality. You get abundant availability throughout the year. So that did matter a lot. And second, in India, when we started, the innovation ecosystem and the startup ecosystem was very limited. But actually, the last 10, 15 years, it has grown tremendously. And we've had the opportunity to benefit from that. Multiple government initiatives, the incubators we are in. India used to be a country where a lot of people in my own college used to just go abroad, for education or jobs. Today, it's reverse. Close to 60% of them want to stay back and do startups. So I think we've also benefited from the whole innovation ecosystem, the kind of people availability, the talent, the infrastructure. Definitely, those have also helped. And with the same basic principles of, how we do things more efficiently.
Yeah. So it speaks to how the environment can really make a difference sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That was about what, 14, 15 years ago. So
Yes. 2010.
C6 has been around for over a decade, and you've been there from the start as a founder. Is there anything you have changed your mind on?
I think over the period of time, we realized that there are opportunities and there are limitations. And you need to pick your battles wisely, right? So when we started, we said, let's go straight and try to solve for biofuels. We spent the first 3, 4 years spending only researching biofuels. But then later on, you realize, biofuel is the last goal that you can get to because of the scale and the price it demands. So in between, we had to say that, okay, let's start looking at the other products as well. And also being in the eastern part of the world, access to capital is not very easy, right? There was a statistics which says that, close to 70-80% of the funding still goes into Europe and US, whereas close to 60-70% of seaweed is grown in the eastern part of the world. There's a big difference in the amount of funding that you can get in this part of the world. It's gotten so much better right now. It's very different. But then when we started 14 years ago, it was a very different story back then. So it was very important for us to do those pivots to make sure we establish sustainable businesses, which is also revenue generating, and not just wait for that moonshot goal. Yeah. So I guess if there's one thing we realized over a period of time, it's like you can't just aim for one thing and go, but you have to build step by step over a period of time.
Was there a specific watershed moment that changed your approach or shifted the direction of the company?
I think if there's plenty of moments which kind of built the company over a period of time. But I think a couple of very big wins or watershed moments would be, registering our products outside of India. Today we sell our products in more than 25 countries, right? From Japan, US, Europe. And nobody had done that before for this particular active ingredient. Getting a patent and getting our products registered, I think that was a big moment for us. And some of the partnerships we developed with some of the largest multinational companies in the agri space, those are very pivotal as well. And today, as we go down the journey of food ingredients and biomaterials, I think the fact that we could make products with a lot less carbon footprint, that's again very exciting. So I think there are multiple. I don't think I can define like this one watershed moment because many of these were the first time to be done, right? Our first 1 square kilometer farm inauguration. I think that was a big moment for us as well because that was never done before. So yeah, I think those could be a few things which come to my mind.
Yeah, a lot of nice little milestones, I guess. But there was no moment where you realized that you were going in the wrong direction or something had to change, kind of thing.
Wrong direction? No, not really. I mean, at least personally haven't had a moment where we said, "Oh, we're in a wrong direction. We need to turn." The closest would have been like, "Okay, we need to build markets throughout and not just wait for the end one."
Okay, let's move on to what I guess is the state of play. So, in a recent interview with Stephen Hermans, which was published on the Fish site, you mentioned that your target is to improve productivity to a point where costs come down enough to open up to new applications, such as making bioplastics or chemicals from tropical seaweed. When talking about bioplastics, for example, on a scale of, say, 1 to 10, how close do you think you are to reaching that point?
So biomaterials is a newer division for us. It's about 2 years old. So we are probably about 18 to 24 months away from getting into A products when it comes to biomaterials.
18 to 24 months is not that bad to make it viable.
So that was just for biomaterials. Okay. So let me break this down for you. So we spent the last 14 years at building to where we are. And that's why biomaterials is 2 years away. Right. So what constitutes this? I mean, what makes a product a success, a project a success, right? So when we started with seaweed cultivation or products from seaweed, the biggest missing link in this whole piece was how do you scale this from a very small holder, manually back-breaking work to a much more easily scalable and a usable method, right? I think that's where it kind of started. So what we had to demonstrate was how you can improve the productivity of per person for a period of time. And that's what we have done. So when we came into this whole field, it used to be the productivity per person per day used to be 10 square meters per person per day. And today we're talking about operating, multiple hectares. And that needed all those harvesting technologies, the seeding technologies, and all of that to be developed from scratch. And by doing that, what you do is you improve the productivity per person, which means you can drop the price of seaweed while keeping the income of the person same or more. So the critical thing here is that was a very crucial step because a lot of people are saying we can make bioplastics, but at what price? As a consumer, I cannot be paying 3x or 4x the cost because it is biodegradable or bio-based. Correct? So it's all about the raw material cost. And I think that's where the optimization took the longest period of time. Now we're looking at now that seaweed prices can be optimized and produced at scale because producing at scale was the other big bottleneck. Today, I think the plastic world produces a few hundreds of millions of tons of use, right? And if you take how much of biomass can replace that, it's a very small fraction. So to be able to sustainably grow biomass, which can even start making a very small dent, not all of it, needed technologies like this to come up. So I think that's what C6 has addressed, the scale and the stability of the price, how it can be done. And now making products out of it, we work on it, but there are also many other companies working on it. So we can also do a very collaborative approach on how we want to take this. That's why the biomaterial piece is 18 to 24 months out.
So, in terms of why does it not take longer, it's because you're building on work that you have already done
Absolutely.
on other areas. Okay.
Exactly.
I just want to pick up on something you said because I think it could be important. You said you can't do it and yet give the same income to the person. And when you say the person, is that the producer, the farmer on?
I was saying that basically the idea is how you can help the person produce more and make more money while you're also working on dropping the cost of seaweed, right?
Okay, so you're looking at it from two different ends. On one end, you have the producer, the farmer, and on the other end, you have the consumer, and you want the consumer to pay a decent price, whilst at the same time the farmer to make enough income.
The farmer to make a decent income and the consumers are not overburdened by the cost. So those are the two things that you need to balance. And the only way you can achieve that is by improving productivity and bringing in mechanization. So the person who's working on it for the same 8 hours of work, he's able to produce a lot more, make more, but then because it's a lot more productivity, you're also able to drop the price of the seaweed. It's a win-win in both sides.
Okay, and to get this done, what are the areas you mentioned mechanization? What are the areas that have the greatest potential for innovation and improvement to boost productivity and cut cost? Mechanization being one. What else is there?
So a bunch of things. One is mechanization is one part. The second part of it is how do you process it? Because many new products were not made. Tropical seaweeds were only being used for making one product, which is carrageenan. It is a hydrocolloid, gelling agent, which is goes into our ice creams. So establishing those new markets, making sure these seaweeds can be processed into those final products, right? We had to establish the whole downstream outside of that. So that's a very critical process. If you don't have both together and you don't match them together, you'll be left with a pipeline where you're producing a lot of seaweed and you don't know what to do with that. So we have to simultaneously build markets like that's why we started building our agriculture markets way back in 2015, 2016. So today we sell that in multiple countries across the world. But that's where the seaweed utilization can also be going through, right? And now when you talk about food ingredients and biomaterials, now that's the new pipeline you're opening up. So everywhere there are things of processing, marketing, regulatory approvals before you actually create a new market.
Going back to the article from Stephen Hermans, which I would recommend, by the way, I'll put some links onto the show notes. You mentioned, if I remember correctly, logistics. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So logistics on the sea is very different from logistics on the land, right? One of the big impediments for many of these people working in the sea is you cannot walk in deeper waters. The biggest limitation is if the water comes to your neck, and that's a really a strong limitation, right? Ferrying things to the sea, back to the sea, in between, those logistics are very, very difficult. The seaweed weighs 10 times more outside the water than inside. So it becomes a very difficult operation. So it's not just about learning how to grow the seaweed and how to make products out of it, but how do you manage logistics very, very efficiently? Because there's a lot of costs on that, right? So I think that's part of the work which C6 does. I mean, we've created systems in which we reduce the amount of handling required or much more efficient ways of handling and doing these logistics, which can also contribute in the overall value chain of how do you make a more efficient biomass available.
Thanks for that. It's a really interesting point. Have you learned anything that you've been able to apply already in the domain of logistics?
Oh, yeah, yeah, definitely. So we've actually created specific vehicles which will help in making logistics much more easier. We've made quick, simple handling equipments which can also help in handling the amount of biomass that is being dealt with. So a lot of these small, small things, big boats, small boats. There's a whole range of innovations that had to come to make logistics much more easier, and we're still evolving it. We've got it down from where it was to a large extent, but I think we still have a path forward to go and do more optimization on that.
In the domain of mechanization, what are the lesson learned and perhaps the current challenges and possible routes to overcome them?
Lots of lessons learned. I think over the years we've realized that. I mean, one thing was, I think this is something that I was telling Stephen also in the article, that sometimes it's not just about mechanization, it's also about site selections. How do you select the right site where seaweeds to grow? Right. So there's a lot to learn about those things. There's a seaweed biology which is involved in it. In mechanization, also you need to balance between complete mechanization automation and also ease of use and cost of how much that equipment will cost. So there are multiple facets on trying to optimize it. So I think that is something that we have learned and done over the years. But I think to make successful farms, it's not just mechanization, it's making sure you understand the biology of seaweed, you understand your site, you work with the community, you understand the community. So it's a completely multi pronged approach before you make a successful seaweed farm.
What are the biggest obstacles that, if you could remove now, would provide the biggest return?
I think acceptance of these newer products. For example, when you talk about seaweed biomaterials, I was recently in a conversation, which stream do you put it in Europe, for example, right? I mean, you talk about recyclables, compostables, but when you talk about seaweed polymers, you still need to understand where to go, what to put it.
In terms of disposal, end of life disposal.
End of life, how where is it really going to fit in, right? So there are no clarity, not fully laid out clarities on that. There is something in terms of SUPD, you get some idea, but in the long term, how is it going to pan out? There's no full ideas on that. And secondly, even when you look at the animal feed or the food ingredients, sometimes many of the seaweed species are not listed. So you can't actually use all the seaweed species. You have to work with a specific set of seaweed species which are already regulated or approved. Otherwise, you're talking about another 5 years of long processes. And companies coming.
Why is that? Sorry to jump in. Why is that?
So, for example, in food regulations and feed regulations, you have to go through an entire regulatory process, which could take 4 or 5 years of data generation, dossier submissions, and government approvals. So, if you're not already in that in a listed species, if you want to bring in a novel ingredient, it is a very, very long process and a very expensive process. So, even if you have a very great or a new biomass or a food ingredient, it's not just quickly that you can put it in and start selling it to everybody. Right? Similarly, for feed as well. With ag, we faced a similar thing. I mean, even though we started making our first products in 2015, 2016, it took us almost 2020 or 21 to start launching it in Europe and US because there was so much of regulatory hurdles that had to be cleared, right? And those take time and money. So making regulatories more accessible, easier for innovations and newer companies to do would definitely help. And of course, funding as well. I think seaweed is still a very nascent industry. I mean, one quote which I keep saying is like, there's not been an IPO in a seaweed company yet, or large PE investments. So I think the industry has to grow to a certain extent where all of this become possible. That's how we're really building it out.
In terms of the regulatory hurdles, do you find that that is true also in the biostimulants space?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes, of course. So, like I said, it took us, I think, 3 to 5 years based on country, which country we're applying to, for regulatory clearances to come through.
Okay. And so in that context, if you were to bring a new species, use a new species, would you have to go through it again?
Of course, yes. If we want to do another one, absolutely.
Yeah. So it quickly adds up, doesn't it?
It quickly adds up, yeah. So sometimes people ask me, like, what takes you 14 years? I say, when you have no regulation, no technology, no people to talk to, not so much funding, it does take that much amount of time.
Do you think that's a reflection of the fact that the industry is so young?
It is. It is definitely a very young industry. In fact, a lot of momentum has been happening only in the last 5 to 6 years. Before that, I still remember, we used to go talk to people, a variety of people, right? The only way I could explain seaweed is, it's not a sushi. So people only think there's a sushi, right? I mean, today the conversation has shifted so much. People understand it so much better. There's a lot of awareness. And I think all this is in the last 5 to 6 years. Before that, it was very, very ancient. I mean, seaweed means sushi. That's about it.
Let me go back to mechanization for a moment. What has been the evolution and possibly the future direction for your automatic seaweed harvester?
So I think in terms of our mechanization, I think we've come a long way. Like I said, we've improved the productivity by multiple fold over the year. But I think there's still a lot more room to improve. We still feel we need to do it even more to build the scale that we are really looking at doing, right? Today we have harvesters, seeders, which are all single operated machines. So we feel that we can go into a multitude of larger machines or integrated machines. That is something that could come in the future. It will also help in scaling up even more efficiently. In terms of farm setups as well, we've had our first 1 square kilometer farm installed, but I think the fully operational is going to happen by March next year, where it will be a 100% operational farm. So there'll be a lot of learnings on the way, and we'll be implementing those learnings as well to make how we can make a much more efficient square kilometer model. And the idea here is about if you can make a 1 square kilometer model, then replicating it into a 10 or 100 becomes much more easier, right? So that's really the critical piece that we're trying to address here. And I think that will be the evolution on how we move forward in this particular part.
In terms of how it's called the C combine, right?
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of how it looked like at the very beginning, so think about what the prototype and the original idea behind the project was.
Yeah.
What do you feel has changed the most from that point? Is it the same thing, or is it completely different from what you originally envisioned?
So there is a video which we made, I think in 2012 or 2013. We'll have to go check. There's a small animation which we made, how we expect our seaweed farms to look, how we expect the sea combine to be working on that. I think that animation kind of still holds true today. I mean, it's in terms of size and scale and how we do it. But a lot of operations and many more things have been added to it. I think what's out there in the media is only the sea combine, right? People only see the sea combine, people see only the farms. But over the years, sea combine is one part of our farming technology. We have multiple other pieces that we have which kind of put in. So sea combine is more like a platform. And when we built it, we actually built it for deeper waters where you want to be doing completely offshore farming. But then what we realized is, there's a lot of shallow water areas also available. Shallow, I mean, depth between under 50 meters, right? Which is a lot. So right now, today, the seaweed farming happens at less than 10 meters of water depth. We can go all the way up to 40, 50 meters, and we still don't need a large sea combine like platform, which is also very expensive and a large machine by itself, right? There's a lot of intermediates that you can do and which we can utilize. And there are multiple other pieces of technology which is coming, which we have developed in-house over the years. Simple things like, anchoring equipments, anchoring systems, which didn't exist. How you don't want to be sending people to put in your anchors below. Those kind of technologies had to be developed. Much more improved seeding and harvesting methods, which are more friendly to operate, low operational costs, can be powered by multiple modes of energy. So all of these have evolved over a period of time. And I think the difference I would say is we thought it will be a single equipment operating a farm, but today we realize it's going to be a set of multiple things which will operate on a farm. So that would be the difference. But otherwise, the farm setup and I think the sea combine itself, that is still there, but that will be more for much more larger offshore systems.
And so definitely an ecosystem of different tools and machineries.
I mean, to give you visually to make it very simple, like if we just thought agriculture was just about using a combine harvester, it's not that, right?
Of
There's a
course.
whole bunch of there's like seedings, there's fertilizers, and there's post harvest. It's a whole bunch of other equipment which go around it. So I think that's the learning. So initially we thought it'd be just one, but now we realize it's going to be a multitude of things which needs to come together to do the farm.
So you touched on let's stay on that analogy. The combine harvester. Normally, the farmers don't own it; they rent it or get a contractor to come in and do the work. Do you see this ecosystem of tools and machineries in the future being something that each farms would own, or would it be more of a third party service?
So I think there'll be multiple models which will evolve, very similar to agriculture. There could be something like a corporate farming model, which will be done by companies at a certain scale. Then you'll have a smallholder model where you'll be giving smaller equipment pieces to people to farm themselves. Then you can have a contract model where you can buy back the produce from them and give them the equipment to do that. So we feel that this is going to evolve over a period of time. I mean, very similar to agriculture. I mean, we have smallholder farms, we have large farms, we have corporate farms. That's basically it has to evolve. We're still at a very early nascent stage. I think all of these models are possible, and I think we want to see how we can drive them towards these multiple models and stakeholder possibilities.
You talked about an ecosystem of products. Looking at your portfolio of products in terms of mechanization, what is available at the moment compared to what you expect will be available in the future?
So what we have already available in our products today is products targeted towards ag. So we have products for improving the productivity of plants. We have products which help in boosting the immunity of plants, right? And that has been a very important commercial vertical for us. I mean, today we sell in more than 20, 25 countries, large global partners that we work with across the world. And so that has been a very key part. Now we're also entering into the
And sorry to jump in. These are what you just mentioned. I understand that that is not machinery. That those
No, no, no,
are
no, no. These are downstream. So C6 has two parts of it. One is what we call the upstream, which is basically production of seaweed, which is where all the mechanization, the farms, and everything come in. And then we have a downstream, which is we take the seaweed which is produced by the farms and convert it into a variety of these products which go into multiple industries. So right now I'm talking about the downstream, the products that we have.
that's good. Thanks for clarifying that. What I was trying to understand is from a customer's perspective, from if anybody was interested in buying some of the mechanization solutions we have talked about, what would be available commercially? Or is there anything available?
No, we're not there yet, right? So we need to develop the full package before we can start thinking of, franchising or selling technology.
So you're very much on the product development and testing and
Yes,
refinement.
scalable refinement. That's what we are.
Let's switch gear because I understand that you now work in Indonesia as well as India. What was the rationale and considerations behind the decision to work in Indonesia?
Going way back, I mean, we started working in Indonesia, I think in 2014 or something like that. The rationale was very simple. Indonesia produces more than 50% of the seaweed that we work with, right? And when you're building technologies, both upstream and downstream, you want to be able to be in a place where you can first start buying the product as it is and then converting into your end stream. You can't say that I will wait for my own farms to come, grow the seaweed, then do research and make final products out of it. So we want it to be in a place where it's already available in abundance. So both our upstream and downstream development happen in tandem in parallel. That was one reason that we chose it. And also, Indonesia geographically is very blessed. It is in the tropical weather with very little temperature variations, and it doesn't have cyclones and many of these issues, like, let's say, if you go a little down to other countries. So it's quite well protected in that way as well. And the third thing that we found was it's a very ocean-faring nation. So people understand ocean, how to work with, what you can do. People are more like in India. If I tell somebody to go start farming, like 10 kilometers away, they're going to be like, "What? Is it even possible?" Right? So it's all to do with the culture, the understanding. So these were some of the reasons, and I think that's how it got started initially.
Is there any other consideration that is more related to the focus on tropical seaweeds?
Yes.
I mean, one, you mentioned the seasonality, of course.
Yeah, that was very clear for us. See, when for us, the tropical seaweeds really stood out because it is one of those few varieties of seaweed which can grow throughout the year. The harvest period is very small; it's only 45 days, right? So if I technically have 45 farms, I can seed and harvest one every day for throughout the year, which means my availability is very, very, very efficient. I can run factories on a daily basis. So my productivity, my efficiency is very good. And the second thing is it also grows just about half a meter to 1 meter on the surface. It does not take up too much of the space inside or outside. So it's again very easy to manage as a farm. And then the third thing is also it had a history of cultivation. People were cultivating this for more than 40, 50 years. So we don't have to reinvent any biology there. People already knew how to grow it, where to grow it, what to do. A lot of understanding history was already available. I think so for being an industrial feedstock, these are very, very key for us. Fast growing, consistent availability, cultivatable. We want to make sure we only work on cultivatable varieties. So these were some very key considerations we looked at the beginning.
Why is that important? Why focus on cultivatable species?
See, when you talk about wild harvest, again, this is my personal opinion, which I would share. Wild harvest in the long run are never sustainable, right? Because that's why you call it wild harvest. And with wild harvest, your consistency and predictability goes down. When you want to enter industries and applications where predictability is going to be extremely important, consistency is very important. You cannot go to some of these really large multinational companies and say, you know what, I don't know how much I can produce next year. I hope this much gets produced. Or the consistency of this batch could be very different from the consistency of the next batch. It is just a non-startup.
In terms of, going back to tropical seaweeds and, what appealed to you of, tropical seaweeds, is there anything linked to the composition, nature and composition?
So we looked at the composition as well, and there was established understanding about what the seaweed can be made into. And that was not a criteria when we started the company. The criteria was more about what can see when we talk about biomass production, at the end of it, it is a sunlight capture game. So which part of the world does maximum sunshine for most of the year? You pick the species there. So that was more like the
Okay. So not so much tropical seaweeds are richer in this or that polysaccharide or whatever.
Not specifically, because they have they're very different. Like temperate waters and tropical water seaweeds are very different in composition. So the tropical seaweeds we've seen they have certain specific carbohydrates which are very easy to work with and convert. But like I said, those were not reasons when we picked it. We learned it over the way. It's much more easier to work in tropical seaweeds when you're looking at conversions.
Okay. In terms of data and available research around tropical seaweeds, what is the situation? What have you found?
Very limited work. In fact, many of the publications and patents is driven by C6, right? Because there were not much of research going into tropical seaweeds for over the years. There's been some amount of work, but mostly concentrated towards that one carrageenan. And there's been some little more work on some biostimulants, but really not very extensive. And publications and patents were all very limited. But today, I think as we speak, there is an International Institute of Tropical Research being set up in Indonesia. So hopefully we will have a lot more, consolidated research coming out of that particular institute. So it has been a challenge for us. Many times we had to, I mean, we didn't have the opportunity to fall back on built up knowledge. Many of the knowledge had to be built ourselves.
Why is that? I mean, these are some of the most widely produced seaweeds. What do you think is behind this sort of lack of knowledge and research and data?
So I think it's a couple of factors. The first factor was, it was this particular seaweed was grown in Indonesia and Philippines, and the end use was in food, typically, let's say, in US and European markets, right? So people just grew the seaweed here. They didn't understand anything about it. They just exported it. There were not companies or people looking at what can be done here. And because it was used for a very specific application, not many other people were saying that, oh, okay, let me try and build up more on it. So one of the first things that we had to do is to understand what other applications can be made out of the seaweed so that you widen the funnel, you widen the pipeline. And I think that way, like I said, India had an innovation ecosystem building up over the years. And because this particular seaweed was available, I think it became a good combination of things to start looking at it. Yeah, before that, not much apart from the,
Not much innovation.
yeah, apart from the, I think the food, of course, to some extent, of the food.
You mentioned what can be done with it. So, with that in mind, what are some of the new applications and products? What are the ones that you are most excited about, and why?
So for us, we are very excited about our biostimulant products, which can help in fertilizer reduce efficiencies and improving yields. So that's something that we're very excited about. We're also very excited about the use in biomaterials and foods. I think it's really an untapped potential for this particular seaweeds. I mean, in all seaweeds, in fact. I think there are a lot of other companies working on seaweeds into biomaterials. So I think that's a huge untapped potential. If we can crack that, I think that will be a big opportunity as well.
You said food and biomaterials.
Yes.
Can we go a bit deeper? If there's anything that comes to mind, if you can elaborate on any of those, because they're obviously they're massive areas in the industry. Is there anything in particular within those facets of the industry that you would recommend starting from, or where you see there's the most potential?
I think the initial starting point would be like where there's a requirement for biodegradable materials, right? So it's a completely circularity approach. It comes and it goes back to nature, kind of a thing. So these are also carbon neutral, right? By something called as carbon avoidance. When we're trying to use these products, then you don't have to use a fossil fuel based equivalent of it. These are some of the easiest aspects you start with, and biodegradability basically means easier disposable. End of life is pretty clearly defined that way. And with seaweeds, I think those can be a real possibility. With foods, I think it's still very underexplored. I think we today use seaweeds maybe in some salads and maybe some sushis. There could be a lot more applications there. We feel there are some very specific nutritional benefits which can be used. We're still exploring it, but I think that again is an area of potential for us.
You mentioned earlier site selection. Why is that important?
I mean, I think again, I'll draw the parallel to your agriculture. There are deserts and there are extremely good soils, right? I mean, you can grow things in deserts also, but you have to be choosy. And there are these very rich soils, there's red soils, there's black soils, and there's a variety of soil available, and different plants grow in different areas at different speeds. So even though the ocean looks very contiguous and equivalent to us, I think it has its own set of parameters which keep varying and supports certain growth in certain areas and not so much in certain other areas. And it is not a static medium, right? It's completely moving medium, the ocean. It's not like the water just stays in the same place. So I think understanding it, that makes very important in terms of site selection. So we've learned over the years that there are certain parameters which you can look at and understand and identify that would help you. But end of the day, unless until you actually put out a seaweed, grow it for a few months, you can never be sure of the whole thing. So these are some of the reasons why we say that site selection is a crucial part.
Yeah. Is there anything in terms of what you learned that made you get better at doing it?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, these are of course internal data, but there is very specific set of data that we do have, which makes us now much more successful in properly identifying the site than where we were 5 years ago.
So it sounds like, without going into much detail, because I understand you might not be able to share this, but it's all about the data you can collect and how you can interpret that data.
Yeah,
Is that
it's a
right?
starting point of it. But like I said, ultimately you've got to test the site with the seaweed growing in it, but it helps you take a better look on where you want to try it.
Impact. Going back to Indonesia and C6 desire to generate a positive impact. How is this materializing and making a difference at a local level?
Impact is multiple fold, and one is on the local level while growing the seaweed, then on the products where the consumers use it, right? So on growing seaweed, of course, see, many of these coastal communities survive on fishing or maybe, lobster cultivation and things like that. But fishing,
In Indonesia,
yeah, in Indonesia or any part, or India also for that matter, the coastal communities pretty much thrive on this, right? But the fish catches are going down. It's not easy anymore. So they're looking for alternative incomes and possibilities. And having a steady state of income is extremely appreciated for anybody, right? It becomes a livelihood option. Whether you're doing your own farming with some support, where a company is willing to buy back what you produce, or you want to be employed in a farm, all of them becomes a many more opportunities for them to be able to be financially independent. And simple things like when a company, I mean, one example I can give you is like when a company like us goes to a village, the infrastructure there gets better, whether it's roads or whether it's restaurants or hotels. It's not just direct jobs that you provide, but your entire ancillary industries, the transportation industries, the trucking industries, when you build a factory there. So you kind of land up improving the entire socioeconomic possibilities around that particular area. So that way, I think that's a big, big possibility. Otherwise, what happens is many of these people, even kids of seaweed farmers in the past, don't want to do seaweeds farming anymore because it's a very difficult work. It's back-breaking, 8 hours in the sun. Nobody wants to do it. Everybody wants to go back, take a job maybe in the city or somewhere else, which is much easier. But by improving these conditions, you hopefully retain a few of them in their own hometowns and being able to make a decent living doing this. So I think that's where the impact on the community side comes. The second part of the impact is by making these products, we typically focus on products which are sustainable in the long term as well. So by improving the yield by, I mean, anywhere close to 5-10% of the final yield, we are capturing that much more carbon. We're using fertilizer much more efficiently, and the end consumer gets a better yield bump, right? So he also gets return on investment, which is very, very well classified. Then when we talk about biomaterials, of course, apart from the carbon story there, where you're helping in creating a more sustainable future, it's also something that waste pollution, right? If you can make biodegradable materials, then at least that's the other part that you're trying to address. So there's a multifold impact here, and I think that's part of what we're trying to achieve.
this might be an oversimplification, but in terms of impact, you mentioned the economic side, so increasing the local economy and growing the household income.
Yeah.
And on the other side, also building a climate resilient and sustainable food system. Do you find that at the root of these two areas, there is fundamentally a need to increase productivity? Is that the key? Does it all go through producing more with the same resources?
Absolutely, because the reason is if you don't actually, I would say they're tied at the hip at 2 points, right? One is you've got to grow your markets because only if you open up newer markets, there's requirement for newer seaweed. If you say that you're only going to be a carrying-in player, there's only so much market that you can play in, right? So opening up those markets, that's very key. So newer applications, newer markets is one of the critical points. And the second thing is to grow these newer markets and newer applications, these consumers are looking for stable, large scale supply of your raw materials, which is your seaweed. So that's where they get joined together. So you open up this stream and you build this stream, they come together, and then you open up an entire industry together.
Are there any concerns surrounding mechanization and how this may take away jobs from the local communities?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you're asking this question. Many times I keep getting asked this question, right? So it's again, let's go back and look. Anytime there's been a new innovation, there's always been these questions, right? And the first time a tractor came, the first time a sewing machine came, And now even with AI coming in, there's always these doubts of will these take away jobs? But every time a new technology has come, it kind of largened the pie. If we were doing agriculture the way before the advent of tractors or sea combines, I don't think we've been able to feed the number of people we have today in this planet. So for us, if you do not have technology coming in, the average age of a seaweed farmer is only increasing. It is not decreasing. And unless until you have technologies coming and helping and aiding, improving productivity, making life better, this industry is never going to take off. Oh, I think that's the core of it. So every time somebody asks me this question, my answer is if you really want the industry to stay the same way, sure, you probably don't need anything. But if we really see this as an industry being capable of growing and solving problems, creating sustainable solutions without technology intervention, that is not going to be possible.
So, staying on the agriculture analogy, technological breakthroughs in agriculture have significantly increased the yield, and one could definitely argue made agriculture better. But at the same time, it has reduced the number of people needed to work in the field. So I suppose in that sense, it is true that one tractor can do the work of many humans.
True, but then it's also because of that you're able to produce so much, right? And the same person, like for example, today, how many people want to work in agriculture if they didn't have a tractor or a sea combine or a land combine? People would not be doing it. Agriculture would not be an industry anymore. If you told, I mean, what our grandfathers or great grandfathers were willing to do, go out in the sun, plant every plant and pick it up with their hands. If today we were still doing the same kind of agriculture, people will not be working in that industry anymore.
Do you reckon, from what you're saying, and it sounds like there's a lot the seaweed industry and seaweed farming can learn from land
Yes.
agriculture. Is there anything that you would avoid applying to seaweed farming?
I think what we also need to keep to mind is, involving communities. I think that's something that C6 is very, very focused on. It's not just about bringing in implements and technology, but how we can also involve the community in it in multiple models. I think that's something that we need to be mindful of, and that will help us in making this model much more successful, and maybe make it more inclusive as well.
You're saying that that's not something that agriculture has done particularly well?
Yeah, to some extent, but see, where there is such early stages in nascent, and it's not like I have all the answers either, right? We know that as long as your heart is in the right place, you're putting your mind to work in the right way, I'm sure you're going to find solutions over a period of time. Because can I predict what's going to be like exactly happening 5 years from now? I don't know. But do we think our hearts we are working on the right direction? Our mind is in the right direction. We have all the education that we need to do that. I think that's where we can say a very strong yes on.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's a case of trying many different things, see what works.
Exactly. I mean, like for example, let's take AI, right? I mean, there's so much around AI. Some people really love it. I mean, the productivity is great. On the other side, how do you control it? How do you regulate it? So at the end of it, it all becomes a balance, right? So every new technology, every nascent industry has to go through that. You need to understand what you can do, where you need to regulate, what you need to increase. I think that's how it will go through it.
Do you feel that seaweed farming and agriculture are getting closer? Is there more of a interlink developing between them?
Yeah, see, I think that's a great question. For example, I think the agriculture biostimulant product that we make out of the seaweeds, right? It really helps in improving the productivity of the land plants, which is also food security linked thing. Along with it, when we talk about fertilizer efficiency, which is also a double win. Today, I think the fertilizer being used, the amount of waste can vary from 50% to 30%, right? Because the efficiencies of taking it up, the wastages, all of that just adds up quickly. So I think we have this proposition where by using ocean agriculture and products from it, we can actually help in land agriculture. So I think that's a very interesting possibility coming together. And that's probably one of the large markets when we get started as well. So about this whole regenerative ag and how seaweeds can be a big part of that.
And do you think that's still in the pipeline, or is it actively happening
That's
at the moment?
actively happening. That's one of our largest verticals, and that is something that we're absolutely focusing on.
I'm going to move to a topic that I know both you and the audience care about. We have very quickly mentioned it and hinted to it before at the beginning of this interview, and that's investment and funding. So 98% of seaweed comes from the Asia Pacific, and yet the vast majority of investment in the seaweed industry are directed towards Europe and North America. What is the reason behind this disparity?
Okay, this is a very high level thought. I think the innovations in this part of the world is getting started over the last decade, right? I think that could be one reason. But I also like to say that, people like to look at their backyard for investing because it's more comfortable. If I'm an investor in US or Europe, it's easier for me to put my money here because I know this ecosystem well. If I have to go like 8,000, 2,000 miles away to put my money, it's a little more difficult. But for an industry like this, I think that is very critical because we had a interesting situation where the East and West can work together and find a solution which is quickly scalable. Now we can say that no, we're not going to work together. We're going to develop everything in our own backyard and take so many years to do that. Versus looking at where it is possible, we work together and then we develop the industry quicker. So I think that's definitely a big disparity, like you rightly said. But I think more and more people are taking cognizance out of it. We see more funds willing to invest outside of their own mandates and geographies. I hope that this kind of increases moving forward.
And you think there's good reasons for global investments to focus more on areas like the Southeast of Asia?
Yeah, all these Southeast Asia. Like for example, in India, if you look at it, there are multiple unicorns that developed over the last decades or more, which was not the case 2 decades ago. Right? Innovation has really sprung up over the years. So the ecosystem exists, the regulations around it have eased, foreign direct investments, and a whole bunch of other things. Right? So when you're talking about energy capture, it has to be in the tropics. I think at least that is very clear. So you've got to be making investments in this area if you want to tap into that part of the energy chain.
What would be the benefits of a closer connection between East and West? What are the low-hanging fruits?
For example, I think a lot of people in the West are very passionate about sustainable solutions. And here, when we talk about whether it's regeneration ag or biomaterials or food supplements, I think we actually have supply which can be scaled up here in the East, and the products can be used in the West, right? So it gives a good connection on producing it in a geography which is efficient to produce and consuming it in a geography where it is required at this point of time. Even if you do the whole calculation on how efficient transportation and everything is involved, rather than trying to invest and cultivate and grow the industry over the next 5 to 10 years and not be able to use it today. It's an approach where you go where it is available, build it as when you're building it in your backyard as well. So that you basically are ensuring supply across the period versus saying that, because if I don't want to look at the place where the seaweed is being cultivated, you've just got to wait another 10 years to start looking at these solutions becoming a reality.
So it sounds like you're saying do both,
Yeah.
but probably start from.
Start where it's available already, right? There's a whole bunch of availability here. Start with it. And the rest of the world will, as we grow, there'll be more and more opportunities, more and more products and producers.
What is the West misunderstanding or underestimating about the East, in your opinion?
I mean, I don't know if misunderstanding is the right word. It's more about familiarity. I would say everybody is like more familiar and comfortable with what we know, and what we don't know, we don't know. Right. So I think investing far away, sourcing far away has always come. And there has been a lot of, like, for example, on governance and regulations, there's been myths of how it's very different in the companies in the south to the east of the world. But I think that's a hugely changed narrative right now. The amount of governance and regulations that we have in this part of the world is sometimes so much more cumbersome and burden than you can actually have it in the West. So I think a lot of that has changed, and that narrative I think is being heard everywhere as well, because some of the large tech investments in India over the last few years has happened, right? And I think that's part of the thing which my personal feeling is it's more about familiarity and understanding, especially when it is money and investing. You just want to be as safe as possible. And until unless you've done a few investments and you've had a exposure of how well that can come in and how easy it is, how understanding. Because at the end of the day, it's all people at the end of it. But you still have to take that first step to get to know and understand. I think that's where I feel there's a little bit.
So with that in mind, what are some of the possible avenues to close that gap?
Like companies like us, I think we are trying to actively reach out to people to show them what's possible here. We've had some fantastic investors on board, like some of our investors like Aquas Park, BSF, they're all European investors, right? So they've been able to come, see the story, understand, and move this forward. We work with some very large companies which are based in the West, which see the possibility and the idea behind why this makes sense to do it this way. So I think there's a lot of change coming in, but we need a lot more awareness about it. So talking more about it. I mean, if you today Google seaweeds, still probably your top 8 hits would be about only the kelps, right? There's very few which is going to show up about tropical seaweed. So bringing in more awareness, talking about it, what's possible here, I think this helps. So yeah, I think that's probably the way in which we can bring up more awareness and understanding and bring in more people.
I always like to ask this, and I will make no exception. You've been at it, particularly because you've been at it for 14 years now. What advice would you give to someone who is just getting started in the seaweed industry?
I think if they're starting right now, I would say collaborate. That is one big advice I would say. Try and reach out to many people who are in the space. Try and collaborate. Do not try to reinvent what has already happened, right? And clearly establish product lines or your core competencies where you want to start playing with. Everything may be a possibility, but picking one at a time. You can play in all 5 over a period of time. So pick the right bets from the beginning. No, and the most important thing I always say is like pick the right team. Because if you pick the right team, there's half the battle won. If you don't have the team, then I mean it's very fun.
If you were to start today, what would you bet on?
I think the bet would be the same. I don't think that would change. The tropical seaweeds.
Tropical seaweeds.
Yeah, I don't think my bet would ever change.
And what is the worst advice that you hear repeated often in the industry?
Oh, we've had people saying that that's just not possible. So
And you don't think that's true?
something that's true. I mean, it's like until a few years back, it was just an impossibility to make even farms of this size or automations of this size. You always have people, you always have the naysayers, right? It's like, oh, no, I don't think it's possible. But I think every time you break it, it's also like breaking the glass ceiling. So it's like you move forward. And I think I have, but nobody has ever given me advice specifically, which has been worse. I think it's more like comments on it's very difficult, it's not possible, those kind of things.
So from your point of view, you're still very much optimistic in terms of what can be done
Absolutely. In fact, I think,
in the industry.
yeah, I think we're just getting to the point where we're really going to start seeing a lot of possibilities coming out of this.
What fuels your optimism?
What we've been able to demonstrate, and we also see other companies in the space trying to demonstrate, and the pull from the markets as well, right? So today we are living in an age where people care about sustainability. People care about what they eat, what they use, and where it's coming from. So I think that makes it a lot more easier to produce products from these. So it's more conducive for creating a sustainable and climate-friendly future. So that's why I'm very, very positive about this.
You think demand is increasing?
Yes.
In your current role, both as a co-founder of C6, but also as a key player in the industry, what is your biggest problem or frustration? And feel free to take this wherever feels relevant to you.
I think the biggest problem or frustration, I think many times it is the awareness also. As much as sometimes you feel there is awareness about these things, you also find a lot of people not aware of such things, right? Whether it is your investors or your buyers or your consumers, you still have to educate them to come to the speed at what's possible. And I think it's also something about any technology being built for the first time, the amount of critics which goes around it, right? It's like people are always double questioning or triple questioning. Really? Have you guys done that? Is it possible? Maybe not. We'll have to see it, these kind of things. So I think this is some of the things that it's just out there. And the third thing, if I could,
And it's a frustration.
and it is a frustration. And the third thing is, of course, it's in a nascent industry. So funding is also nascent. It's not like there's a bunch of PE or large people who can go and raise money, and so the industry is growing along with it. But that's not more of a frustration. I think it is an evolution which we have to all go through. But it can also be a call of action. More people who are, interested in building sustainable products and economies should be focusing on seaweed and how to support.
Okay. Do you find that there's some problematic misconceptions within the industry or toward the industry?
Right now, not so much. I feel there's a more positivity than negativity at this point of time. That's true. I mean, there's always some critics says, how will this industry scale up? Those kind of questions keep coming in.
I was thinking more like, myths and things that people in general don't understand or have misunderstood. And, these things can stick and then they're very difficult to get rid of. Do you find there's anything like that?
Not particularly fed. I mean, like I said, there's critics generally, it's always, but I not specifically. I think, like I said, there's more positivity, which I see around the industry today, than challenges on that front.
Sowmya, is there anything you would like to mention in closing that we haven't brought up? Any final message or call to action? Any topic that maybe we haven't covered or anything that you wanted to talk about?
Sure. So I think what I could say is like people who are interested in this space who want to know more, I think they should definitely reach out to us or to our investors, Petitive Productions, PIP as well, including
In what capacity?
sustainable solutions, seaweed economy, how to invest in this part of the world, any of that. I think that would definitely help.
And you have content or resources in your website, or
Yeah,
is there
yeah,
any
yeah,
other
yeah.
way?
Definitely. I mean, people can go to our website. There's email IDs listed there. There's also inquiry forms, and yeah, I mean, happy to get in touch. LinkedIn uh, available, so that way we can definitely get in touch.
So for anybody wanting to get in touch, we'll make sure we put these links and channels available on the show notes. Thank you for this incredible deep dive and for sharing so many insights from your experience.
Thank you so much, Fed, for having me on this, and I hope there is some answers about the seaweed industry which came out today.
Thank you guys for listening, and until next time, take care.